This special NBC up and on its way. For an update report, here's correspondent George Engel at Cape Kennedy.
Apollo 14 is now passing over the Pacific just south of Christmas Island. The altitude, speed, and flight path right on target after a delayed but perfect launch here at Cape Kennedy. Astronauts Shepard, Roosa, and Mitchell report no problems aboard as they cross the Pacific Ocean. Medical telemetry at liftoff showed Roosa a bit excited. Mitchell almost unflat. No readings on Alan Shepard because of a loose connection. In a little over an hour and a quarter, as the ship passes over Australia, the big engine of the S-4B third stage should be powered up to boost Apollo 14 out of orbit and on the way to the moon, almost 250,000 miles away. This is George Engel, ABC News, Cape Kennedy.
The liftoff was at 4:03 Eastern Time. The launch was delayed 40 minutes because of bad weather, but the liftoff itself was perfect. And in a few minutes, the Apollo 14 was in departing orbit around the Earth. With Earth orbit achieved, Vice President Agnew went into the firing room at Cape Kennedy to offer his congratulations to the launch crew.
The Apollo 14 spaceship with astronauts Alan Shepard, Stuart Roosa, and Edgar Mitchell on board rocketed through overcast skies at Cape Kennedy, Florida this afternoon toward a planned Friday landing on the moon. The blastoff was delayed for about 40 minutes because of the clouds. NASA officials, apparently mindful of the lightning that struck the Apollo 12 spaceship when that craft was allowed to blast off during a storm in November of 1969, took no chances today and ordered the countdown held up with just over 8 minutes to go. Everything continues to go well on the flight. The astronauts are now orbiting the Earth, and shortly after 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time are scheduled to fire the Saturn rocket to push their ship out of Earth orbit and toward the moon. Among the many thousands of persons who witnessed the liftoff
is on its way. Apollo 14 is now in its second orbit of the Earth. At Cape Kennedy, ABC's George Engel watched the big rocket pierce the clouds.
What a magnificent spectacle that launch is. It is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. When that flame begins to come out and it starts to move off that pad, it just blows your mind. Into the clouds.
Then correspondent George Engel heard astronaut Mitchell tell capsule communicator Gordo Fullerton,
"We just burst into sunlight, Gordo. It was quite a sunrise."
Roger, Ed. We copy that.
in about 15 minutes, the astronauts are expected to fire their rockets to get them onto the path to the moon. President and Mrs.
Earth orbit and is now on course for the moon. The astronauts fired their large rocket for 6 minutes, increasing speed to 6,300 miles an hour. That burn completed just minutes ago and was confirmed during this brief conversation between Earth and the Apollo.
Roger 14, cut off.
The mission is now just a few minutes shy of 3 hours old. It was held up 40 minutes because of bad weather. While Alan Shepard is a veteran spaceman, Stuart Roosa and Edgar Mitchell are rookies. While in Earth orbit, capsule communicator Gordon Fullerton in Houston asked Mitchell,
Okay, I had one question from Dr. Gilruth. They're wondering how you all like zero-G.
I think I got that one, Gordon. You're asking about zero-G, and it's really great. Everybody's in great shape. We're having a ball. We'll have the timeline.
Astronaut Mitchell is 40 years old. He'll work on the surface of the moon with Shepard. NASA officials say the delay in liftoff this afternoon will not affect the time for moon landing. The astronauts will speed up slightly and land in the ocean of storms Friday morning. President Nixon watched the Apollo 14 take off on television.
Masterman. The Apollo 14 spaceship has rocketed out of Earth orbit and is headed for the moon. The latest now from Peter Hackus at the Apollo Space Center.
Apollo 14 is racing toward the moon at this hour. About 30 minutes ago, astronauts Shepard, Roosa, and Mitchell fired the engine of the third stage launch boost rocket, to which they're still attached, and after 6 minutes had broken out of the Earth's gravitational pull and were heading for the moon. Here's how it began, a conversation between Houston and Apollo 14.
We have ignition.
Roger, ignition.
Smooth start. Steering's good.
Roger, and we show good thrust on the S-4B.
That's Al Shepard, spacecraft commander, giving that report.
At the end of the successful booster firing, Houston received this report from astronaut Edgar Mitchell.
We have good signal strength for you now, and I might say the Earth is starting to drop away very rapidly at this point.
Roger.
And Stu and Al have started to change seats.
For 80 hours now, Apollo 14 will continue to coast on toward the moon. Reports from the spacecraft continue to reflect a textbook flight. The launch from Cape Kennedy was perfect, except for a 40-minute delay caused by the weather. But they'll make up that 40 minutes through a mid-course maneuver during the flight to the moon, arriving there on time early Friday morning. Peter Hackus, NBC News at the Apollo Space Center.
And Mrs. Thomas with news from American FM Radio.
The Apollo 14 is on its way to the moon. For an up-to-the-minute report, we switch live to correspondent George Engel at Cape Kennedy.
Kitty Hawk is on its own now. The command ship is separated from the Saturn third stage, turned itself around in flight to hook up onto the lunar lander Antares. Once that link-up is made, very tenderly, the two ships will turn around again. The command ship Kitty Hawk will push the lunar lander in front of it all the way into orbit around the moon. As they approach for this link-up, Ed Mitchell said he saw millions of tiny particles left by the separation of the stages. He said they looked like little winking stars. The Saturn third stage, the S4B, will take its own course to crash onto the moon. Astronauts Shepard, Roosa, and Mitchell report all is perfect so far on the mission to the moon. More than 6,000 miles from Earth, they've even managed to pick up a couple of minutes of the 40 minutes they lost in this delayed launch. This is George Engel, ABC News, Cape Kennedy.
Apollo 14 blasted off from the Cape a little over 3 hours ago. More news in a moment.
Has developed problems that threaten the future success of the mission. At a point about 5,000 miles from Earth, as Apollo 14 command module pilot Stuart Roosa tried to dock his command module with the lunar module, 4 times tried and failed in that procedure. The transposition and docking maneuver began about 11 minutes after 7 Eastern Time tonight, with the astronauts reporting no difficulty as they closed in on the lunar module. About 16 minutes past the hour, or about 5 minutes later, astronaut Roosa reported that the spacecraft was in fact docked. Then he reported he was backing off to try once again. He did try again, tried 3 more times, and then reported that he was about out of ideas. At this moment, the astronauts are safely in their command module, sitting approximately 5 feet away from the lunar module, working with Mission Control in Houston to decide what can be done to successfully complete this docking. Without the docking, of course, there can be no continuation of this flight to the moon and the landing on the moon. The astronauts will be able, however, to return safely to Earth in their command module. There is further the possibility that even with a successful docking, the Mission Control engineers may decide not to risk a further undocking for that flight to the moon. Once again, after
award-winning news.
News from American Contemporary Radio. I'm John. Hookup problem aboard Apollo 14. Details on it. Apollo 14 has a problem tonight. A little while ago, the astronauts pulled the command ship away from the third stage of the Saturn rocket to turn around to go back and pick up the moon lander, but 2 attempts to hook up have failed. Astronaut Stuart Roosa.
Houston, we backed out a little bit, and that last time I hit it pretty good, and we're just not getting the capture latches in there.
NASA says the problem apparently is those latches on the moon lander not snapping into place. Then what to do next? Again, astronaut Roosa and Mission Control in Houston.
One possibility is a sort of a shear pin that is pulled off when the tower is jettisoned, and first look at it, we're thinking maybe that may not allow the capture latches to depress. I guess I just have to tell you to stand by while we talk it over here more.
Okay, we're nice and comfortable, and I'm just going to drift around here about this range and try not to use any more fuel than I have to.
Astronaut Roosa talking to Mission Control. ABC correspondent Merrill Muller reports from the Cape. No decision yet on what to do. Mission Control is resetting some switches to see if the problem can be taken care of. Apollo 14 blasted off at 4:03 p.m. Eastern Time today. It was 40 minutes late because NASA wanted to wait until a heavy thundercloud moved away from the launch pad. In other news tonight...
Oil Corporation. This is John Palmer, NBC News. Apollo 14's mission to the moon is in trouble, but the crew is in no danger. Astronauts Shepard, Mitchell, and Roosa have been trying to dock their command and service module with the landing module nestled in the 4th stage of the launch vehicle. So far, there have been several attempts. Apollo 14 had completed its trans-lunar firing from orbit, designed to start the spacecraft on its long coast to the moon. An hour later, when astronauts attempted to link their ship up with the moon lander, the docking probe would not lock with the lander. Experts on the ground in Houston are trying to figure out what effect future docking attempts will have on the mission. Stay tuned to NBC for continuing coverage of Apollo 14.
give it the throttle, keep it moving forward. We wanted to make one more attempt here to show you this 4th try. Coming in quite fast this time. There is contact.
Okay, Houston. Houston, I hit it pretty good and held 4 seconds on contact, and we did not latch.
Roger. We're seeing it all on TV here.
You heard Stu Roosa, still no latch. The crew has a period of time that they can continue with this attempt. The restricting item would be as long as we have attitude holding on the S4B. We're at 3 hours 25 minutes.
We said that was a videotape recording of events that began about an hour ago and concluded in that recording 20 minutes ago. Electricity they require for a safe return to Earth. The emergency clearly threatens for the second time in a row a planned American landing on the moon. We will be standing by here to bring you further information as it becomes available. David Shoemaker.
Battery power in the S4B will last for approximately 6 to 8 hours. As long as the power is still available, the crew will be able to try to dock and see if they can overcome the no-latch problem. After that, docking will not be possible, the moon landing will not be possible, and the Apollo 14 crew will speed on, swinging round the moon and returning to Earth. This problem does not affect their life support systems, and it does not affect their ability to return to Earth safely, but it does jeopardize their landing on the moon. Stay tuned to ABC for further details.
Apollo 14 is having trouble with the critical docking maneuver far out in space. After a flawless blast-off and a perfect burn that sent the Apollo 14 on its way toward the moon, the Apollo 14 astronauts ran into a problem. In a maneuver to position the command module and the lunar lander for the moon landing mission, the command module separated with the third stage of the rocket just like planned, moved away, and turned around. However, when the command module moved in to dock with the lunar lander, the two spacecrafts failed to lock together as planned. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell reported that the capture latches that locked the two spacecrafts together did not properly lock. At the suggestion of Mission Control, the command module backed off and tried again, but still no luck. Mitchell told controllers, "I hit it pretty good and held it for 4 seconds, but we still didn't latch." Mitchell reported seeing some scratch marks on the spacecraft that would indicate the capture latches were not operating properly. Ground Control told Apollo 14 to stand by while they tried to figure out how to overcome the problem. The Apollo 14 has plenty of time to make the docking, but unless it is successful, the moon landing mission will have to be scrubbed.
By the Gulf Oil Corporation. The Apollo 14 astronauts are having trouble docking their command ship with the lunar module as they streak toward the moon. Mission Control in Houston says attempts are being made to solve that problem. The astronauts have tried 3 attempts already to dock, and space officials say they have between 6 and 8 hours to accomplish that docking. After that, the rocket, the Saturn V portion, will become so unstable that it would be dangerous to dock. We will bring you up-to-date reports on the latest situation with the flight of Apollo 14 on this NBC station. John Palmer, NBC. We hastily put up our lines here to get to Roy Neal, and while we had a picture of Roy talking to us, we couldn't understand him or hear anything he said. We're working on that and try to fix that up. This is a live picture we're looking at right now. Again, the picture being shot out the window of the command module. We're looking at the S4B, and just the bare legs of the lunar module are protruding from the end of that. Again, 3 attempts have been made to try to hook up the two craft as they are now going thousands of miles an hour heading on toward the moon. As things stand now, it's a little bit dangerous to predict what decisions are going to be made by Mission Control, but at worst, we might say now that it looks as though certainly they're on the way to the moon, that they could carry out some experiments in photography as they circle the moon. Of course, there would be no moon landing, but the mission would not by any means be a total loss, and that we would get another close-up look, at least within 50 miles or so, of the lunar surface. To recapitulate the situation, we're looking now at Mission Control in Houston, and many heads are being put together now, trying to figure out exactly how much time they have
And the latest word we had on that is that they have between 6 and 8 hours, because after that time, the Saturn rocket, which is encasing the lunar module, will become too unstable because it will be so low on fuel that it would be dangerous. There's always a danger in the docking that the lunar module might crack into the command module, because it's a very tricky thing. It's kind of trying to put a plug into a wall, to plug in a lamp. You have to hit the right connection, and as soon as you do, supposedly the plug then is locked in, and so they will go in tandem to the moon. And our problem right now is that they are not locked in, and after trying 3 times,
there now. 2 helicopters have closed on the splashdown site.
The Apollo 14 astronauts splashed down on target in the South Pacific this afternoon, ending man's boldest and most scientifically rewarding moon mission. Aboard the pickup ship, the USS New Orleans, Mission Commander Alan Shepard said he and his co-pilots Edgar Mitchell and Stuart Roosa had a terrific flight. President Nixon telephoned the space trio aboard the New Orleans and welcomed them back to Earth. Mr. Nixon expressed the thanks of a grateful nation for their exploit. Details of the splashdown and recovery of Apollo
out the window of the command module. Astronaut Stuart Roosa struggled with this problem at the command ship controls, while Apollo 14 Commander Alan Shepard and lunar module pilot Edgar Mitchell watched, because Stuart Roosa is the man in charge of the docking operation. He is the command module pilot. He was the man who, he said, unhappily was saddled with the job of circling the moon while his 2 friends were down on the moon. If you look down in the lower portion of your picture, you see a half of a moon or something, a half of a hole. It's the actual hole that in which the docking is supposed to take place. That is where the command module nose is supposed to go in. It goes in that hole. Supposedly, it is then locked into place. And that's the problem right now. It looks like a static picture. It is a live picture, but of course they're both moving at terrific speed, but they are both in the same ratio to each other, so there's no movement. Right now, the situation, after 3 attempts, is that officials in Houston are no doubt talking, not frantically, but with great earnest, with the officials at the Marshall Space Flight Center, where the Saturn V was put together, and they're talking now latch talk. How the latches, what could have happened to the latches, why they're not locking on to the command module. Again, all this means is, while it's a disappointment in the objectives of the Apollo 14 mission, the astronauts are in no danger, so they're on the way to the moon. This means they will continue to the moon, circle around the moon, perhaps go into orbit around the moon, or just might come right back. But again, they are in no danger at all. But disappointment certainly at this point to astronaut Alan Shepard, who 10 years ago, as you know, made man's first suborbital flight, and he had been looking forward a long time to this lunar landing. The 3 astronauts rocketed out of Earth orbit and streaked on toward the moon, but then again, 3.5 hours into the flight, trouble developed as the command ship attempted to link up with the lunar lander, carried in the 3rd rocket stage. The capture latches simply failed to work properly, and the ship's unable to lock together. So throughout the next few hours, Mission Control will be working with the astronauts. At one point, I'm not quite sure which one it was, but one of the astronauts radioed to Mission Control, I'm just about out of ideas. I don't know what to do now. Perhaps you can come up with some suggestions. And Mission Control said to stand by, and then they contacted the people at the Marshall Space Flight Center to see what the situation was there, and they're having their latch conference now. So it is at this point a disappointment, the mission of Apollo 14, but the astronauts are in absolutely no danger. We'll be around throughout the evening to bring you the latest reports on the mission of Apollo 14, so we ask you to stay with us. This is John Palmer.
This is Roy Neal, NBC News at Apollo Control in Houston. The Apollo 14 command module still has not managed to hook up with the lunar module. Mission Control here and the astronauts 18,000 miles out in space
have not figured out why the latches have failed to latch. They have tried to hook up 5 times in the last 2 hours, and now they are seriously considering putting on spacesuits and going outside to bring in the probe to the command module to find out why it's not working. At the moment, they're trying a last experiment to get the latches working. If the problem can't be resolved in about 12 or 13 hours, the lunar landing will not be possible. The astronauts are safe, but their mission is very much in doubt at this hour. Roy Neal, NBC News in Houston.
Stay tuned to NBC for continuing coverage of Apollo 14. Brought to you by the Gulf Oil
Control in Houston. We have a hard dock. That was the happy news that came through just a few moments ago. The problem, 18,000 miles out in space, was resolved. The 6th try was the lucky one. Apollo 14's Kitty Hawk and Antares spacecraft are now latched, and Apollo 14 is well on its way to the moon. For almost 2 hours, the 2 spacecraft failed to hook up. But finally, just a few minutes ago, success was achieved. Apollo 14 well on its way. We can now look forward to, hopefully, a mission for the next few days that will be relatively uneventful. Roy Neal, NBC News in Houston.
This has been a special progress report.
I'd like to take a look at it. Well, we heard at one point that some scratches on the hole in the drogue in the LEM were visible. What did that mean?
Well, this is rather normal. You must visualize this somewhat like a fighter refueling from a tanker. He has his drogue out there, and the fighter, of course, flies his probe into it. The command module has the probe, and the drogue is a funnel-like device, so that when the two meet up, the probe is funneled into the center of the drogue, and scratches are made in the Teflon surface of it normally. They're 2 fairly heavy spacecraft.
I don't mean to make you wonder what I'm doing. I just got a note that our Jules Bergman, our science editor, was on the phone, but I don't have a phone out here. We now have a picture from Mission Control in Houston. I see that this is taking place now. These are the men who actually figured out what remedies they could take and what procedures they could take. I do have Jules on the phone now. I can talk to Jules. Is Jules being heard on the air? I'm not certain, Jules, whether you're on the air or not. I do, Jules. Speak up, however, because we're trying to transfer you through several switchboards. Whoops. No, I think we've lost Jules. An operator has cut a dial tone in on the line or some automatic part of the bell system, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to hear him. Jules and the ABC anchor team were at Cape Kennedy, of course, for liftoff today, and they were planning to come back to New York to take over the duty of watching this flight there. And they tried to correct that by making many modifications. They did for this one, did they not? They put in an extra battery, an extra oxygen tank, and now this new emergency has come up. But it appears that they have successfully overcome it. To repeat, the Apollo 14 crew had a problem which could have jeopardized their landing on the moon, not their safety, and not their safe return to Earth. But the last word from Mission Control in Houston is that the docking has been accomplished successfully. They are now headed for the moon once again in complete form, and they should be able, as far as this event of this evening is concerned, to land successfully and complete their mission. For Dick Sprague, this is Sam Donaldson.
With 11 hours into the Apollo 14 mission, some trouble was encountered, but it's been solved now. For a report, we go live to ABC correspondent Merrill Muller at Cape Kennedy.
The backroom boys at Mission Control in Houston figured out how to solve the problem of getting mothership Kitty Hawk locked on to moonship Antares, which was still inside the S-4B rocket floating in space some 20,000 miles above the United States. It went like this. In the air to ground, the commander of the space flight, Alan Shepard, was instructed to have Stu Roosa fly a certain way toward a lockup, and at the right moment, while power was still applied, Shepard was to fire a gaseous bottle to make the latches on the probe catch Antares, or else throw them off so that other latches inside them could catch the moon lander. Here's how it went.
We got some, Houston.
I believe I got a hard dock, Houston.
That was Ed Mitchell monitoring what was happening. Then the ground again called Shepard to find out about that docking.
Al, can you just give us a qualitative feeling of
what it sounded like when those docking latches did go? Did you get a sort of a ripple bang, or are you convinced you got quite a few of them?
Yeah, it was a ripple fire, Gino. I'm convinced we got quite a few.
Yeah, that sounds pretty familiar, Al. It sounds like you really probably, I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see if you got them all.
Yeah, I think we got quite a few, Gino. It was a good hard dock.
Beautiful. Tell Stu that session he had this morning paid off.
The session, of course, was a discussion with some of the technicians. The procedures now are all successful. They are going back as rapidly as possible to the basic mission plan for a landing on the moon. This is Merrill Muller, ABC News.
More news.